Hello, my ownership babes. Thank you for being here. I remember years ago just being in rooms that were not necessarily designed for a person like me. However, I still showed up in those rooms. I made my style known, my presence known in the room. And what it led to was promotions, more income, and currently it has led to a debt free and a corporate America free life. And I'm going to share with you today how I did that. So I remember the first room that I was in. When I think about it, the first room, it was a leadership room. I had the title per se, but I did not have the position. So as I was sitting there with people that were more seasoned than I felt invisible in that room. I felt invisible. Some of it was intentional, some of it probably was not. But what I felt could not be shaken. I felt invisible. But I decided in that moment, in that room, that I would never be invisible again. And I also decided that every room that I wanted to be in was not necessarily the room I needed to be in. However, if I was going to be there, I needed to get something out of it. And what I needed was to get paid so that I could achieve my goals and my dreams. So let's talk about presence. So when I started to show up in rooms, I had to change my style. See, often if you think about it, how do you identify a police officer, or how do you identify, let's say, a doctor? If you're out somewhere and you see, a doctor, you go into a doctor's office, how do you identify a fireman? All of these people are identified by what? Their uniform. So if you're a person like me, a future at that time, I was a striving ownership babe. I had to look like it. See, it wasn't about where I was. I wasn't totally an ownership babe at that moment, but I knew I was going there. So I had to make sure that my look, it actually exemplified that. It showed that I was an ownership babe. So when I stepped in a room, I made sure I stepped in there in style. It was that those rooms, those boardrooms were my runway to success. Was I competing with anyone else? No, I was competing with myself to be the best version of the woman that I was becoming. So not only did I show up in style, I started to realize in those rooms that I needed to, raise my standards. And my standards were very low. So I started to get headstrong about getting the compensation that I deserve. I remember being in a meeting with an executive, and we were talking about, pay, and we were talking about, and they were telling me, well, this is what I normally pay, and I was telling them, this is what I needed to get paid. See, I was so confident. See, I understood in there what it did was it elevated my confidence in terms of money. And I knew that if I was headed to being an ownership babe, I had to get the right pay. So I had to negotiate the pay. So my negotiation skills were part of my presence. They went up because I stayed in the room. And also, because I stayed in those chaotic rooms, shall I say, those rooms were very chaotic. And because I stayed calm, I stayed centered, I was invited to the next rooms. See, if you're invited into one room, but maybe you don't show up in any other rooms, you maybe want to look within and see how are you handling those situations. Because of my calmness, I was invited back in. And because of that, I was allowed to grow. My presence grew. And because my presence grew, my pay grew. So basically what I'm saying here is that my presence equaled my power. That's what showing up in the room will do for you. It will equal power. It will get you paid. And the next thing that it did is it led to my debt freedom. See, I started using not only the pay that I was receiving, because now I was making the pay I knew I deserved, but also, and the pay that I needed necessarily to pay off all my debt. I would also use my wisdom. So I combined my wisdom, which was my accounting wisdom, and using my amortization table and figuring out how I could own my home, which I currently do, figuring out how I could pay off all my debt, which that is done. I am completely debt free. So I use that situation of showing up to lead to my debt freedom. Not only did it lead to my debt freedom, it also led to freeing me from corporate America. See, I knew once I became debt free, totally debt free in corporate America, I had no mortgage, no car payments, no nothing. I knew that the world was going to come after me, the corporate America world. See, the corporate America they love people that show up, and necessary those people that show up and you need them. See, I no longer needed them. And when you need them, what they do is they'll string you along. They'll string you along to that next promotion that you'll probably never get, or that next pay increase that you'll never get. They just want you, give you just enough so you'll show up, and then so you'll show up the next week and the next month and the next year. So I became unstoppable because I did not necessarily need their check, but guess what? I wanted it. I wanted that check. Why? Because everything at that point became a profit. Every single dollar I made was a profit. It was money to invest like no other. It was money to save like no other, to plan for my future. So it was different. I was able to show up in those rooms now I had an elevated presence. That presence that, hey, I'm here still to show up, to give all all I have, rather, because I'm representing who? Myself, Tiffany. But I did not necessarily have to be there. So I had that cocky, quiet confidence going on. So all that led to a decision, because I knew either corporate America would decide at one point, we don't need her, or I would decide I didn't want them because I didn't need them. So what I did was, once that decision was made, I was able to leave corporate America with no frustration. I am not mad at corporate America. Why? Because I used them. I used their rooms that weren't built for me, their environments that were not built for me, their income that was not created for me, but I got them to give it to me. I used all of that to build a life of alignment for myself. See, it just wasn't about the goals that I needed to hit. I needed to have a life of alignment. And I used every single thing that they offered me in corporate America to do that. Even the room that I was not supposed to be in. So my challenge to you is to, number one, if you're going to be in those rooms, show up and know your value. Once you know your value, guess what? You can put a price on it. You can demand the price that you know that you need, the standard that you need, so that you can position yourself for debt freedom. You can position yourself for corporate America freedom, like I currently am experiencing. So I challenge you to do that, and know that corporate America, what it does is it teaches you how to lead. It really does. But and that will take you so far in life. But your presence, that will take you in places you can never imagine. So I challenge you, my ownership babes, if you are in that room, you are uncomfortable, that is a sign. That is a sign that it is time to move. Maybe not necessarily move to another room just yet, because I do believe timing is everything, but it's time for you to step up. Step up your standards, step up your leadership, know your value, own that room. When you step in that room, you're supposed to change the temperature of that room. Do not conform to it. You are bigger, you are better than that. You are an ownership babe. And I thank you for tuning in. And until next time, my ownership babes, hasta luego.